Hi, everyone. Welcome to the San Francisco Roundtable Technical Working Group meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order of the March 18, 2022 San Francisco Airport Community Roundtable Technical Working Group meeting at 3 p.m. We are meeting via teleconference, and joining us today are staff to the Roundtable, Angela Montes, Roundtable Administrative Secretary, Lorene Stockdale, Interim Roundtable Coordinator, Jean Rindale, Technical Consultant to the Roundtable from HMMH. We also have Lisa Awasasa, Deputy Director, Planning and Building Department, County of San Mateo, Linda Wallen, Senior Legislative Aide to Supervisor Dave Pine, David Ong from the San Francisco Airport Aircraft Noise Office, and Brian Perkins from Congresswoman Jackie Spears' office. At this point, Doreen, do we have anyone from the FAA with us? I see.
Yes, Alana Jaris is here.
We have Alana Jaris, welcome. At this point, Ms. Montes will explain how the public can participate in tonight and this afternoon's meeting, and will open public comment on items not on the agenda.
Thank you, Chairman. For those attending the meeting on the Zoom video conference, we will use the raise hand feature in order to organize any public comments. During the general public comment period, and for each item on the agenda, I will ask those members of the public who wish to comment to click the raise hand feature to speak on that agenda item. When you hear your name called, I will prompt you to unmute your microphone and you may begin speaking. You will have 2 minutes. Written comments that were submitted in advance will be read by me, will be directed to the website for the appropriate agenda item. For those joining by phone, you may press *9 to indicate your desire to speak, and then *6 to unmute your microphone. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Montes. We will now move on to roll call. Ms. Stockdale, please proceed with the roll call.
Yes, for our members for quorum, Chair Hindi.
Yes, here.
Member Ortiz.
Present.
And Member O'Connell.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. We will now move on to public comments for item not on the agenda. Staff will read any written comments and allow members of the public to speak.
Thank you, Chairman Ortiz. And also for the record, I would like to state that we do have Member Ann Schneider with us, Member Bill Widmer with us. And I believe for our members, that is it. So I just wanted to note that. But I do not see any virtual hands raised for items not on the agenda, Chair.
Thank you. So now then we will move on to set the agenda and approve the consent agenda, which includes item 2, resolution adopting findings for remote meetings. Staff will read any written comments and allow members of the public to speak. Ms. Montes, do we have any public comments?
Thank you, Chairman. We did not receive any written public comment. And I also do not see any virtual hands raised for this item.
Okay, thank you. With that, then I'm looking for a motion to set the agenda and approve consent item number 1 and item number 2, the resolution to continue to meet virtually.
So moved. Second.
Okay, Member O'Connell moved and seconded Member Ortiz, is that correct?
Yes. Actually, I never got my mouth open, so it was someone else.
Someone else, okay. I apologize. Who made the motion then?
I might have. I did.
All right. Thank you so much. This is Vice Chair Royce.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Stockdale, roll call, please.
Yes. I'm going to just do a roll call for the 3 members that we need for quorum. So that's Chair Hindi.
Yes.
And Member Ortiz.
Yes.
And Member O'Connell.
Yes.
Thank you. With that, we'll move on. Thank you. With that, we'll move on to item number 3, the 10 of Farran San Bruno development. This item, the San Francisco Airport has asked for this item to be on the agenda. I'm not sure if anyone from SFO would like to speak on it, but I'll kind of give you a very quick brief on what's going on and why SFO has approached Roundtable. So SFO has approached me asking what is my opinion on the Tampa development project, specifically as it pertains to developing housing on that site, and especially that it is in the 70 noise contour. I had explained to a representative from the San Francisco Roundtable, San Francisco Airport, that the Roundtable really does not have any jurisdiction, as we all know. And not only that, it's not in the purview of the Roundtable to tell a city what it does, what it does not do, specifically when it comes to issues of housing. And this item is more appropriate to be with the land use, airport land use with CCAG. And but the Roundtable asks for our opinion, and with that, I like to bring it to the technical working group. If you have any opinion, basically SFO would like a letter, whatever that letter we would decide would be, to San Bruno, explaining to them or reminding them, or whichever we have a discussion about, that really putting housing project in that contour has consequences to those potential future residents that is not conducive of what we are trying to do, bring less noise to residents. So with that, that's my brief summary. I'm not sure if anyone from SFO would like to add anything to what I just said. Okay, seeing none, then I'll open it to members of the public. I'm sorry that now I will have to open it for discussion to the committee members.
But through the chair, this is Ricardo.
Yes.
And so just for clarification, so we're being asked as a roundtable to send a letter to San Bruno, letting them know what the I'm sorry, so reminding them that this is a bad place to build housing. Is that kind of what we're doing?
Yes, exactly. I mean, they wanted us to, originally they wanted us to kind of opine on the project more or less, or even advocate with ABAG to lower the arena numbers, or to have other requests to perhaps have different sites, to have ABAG designate different sites. But again, that's not in our purview. So I think the only appropriate thing, in my opinion, that if we want to send a letter to San Bruno to remind them that this is really not the best place, and residents should be expecting a great deal of noise, aircraft noise.
So we will be recommending that to the full roundtable?
If that is the wish of the technical working group.
No, I'm fine either way. Yeah, I think that's, again, it's kind of an obvious statement that we're going to make, that that's not a good place to build housing because of the airport. I might recommend that we quote some of the area land use. I'm forgetting the name of the document, but there is a document that governs what can be built, in the area land use committee is the one who reviews that. So I would recommend that the language includes some of that in there.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
Through the chair.
Yes, Member O'Connell.
I sit on the airport land use committee, and while we have no direct influence, so to speak, when we make a recommendation that something doesn't conform, that goes to CCAG, and then it is certainly still up to the city to override it, but they need a 4/5 majority on their council to do so. But it really comes down to the city's will. And when we try to, besides make a recommendation, we're always advised by the CCAG staff that it's not really in our purview to try to make further direction. It's very difficult for us to get that through to staff to make further direction as the CCAG. And I'm not sure what logistics we have or what legalities we have as the SFO roundtable to make that kind of statement to another city when we don't have any jurisdiction. So I certainly agree with it. I think it's a bad place for housing, but I'm just not sure if we should be biting that off when it's not in our realm to do so, and if this should be more informational to the individual members for them to write it on behalf of themselves or their opinions rather than through this group. So
Okay.
I'm just not sure where our purview lies in that.
Yes,
Thank
that's
you.
correct. And please note that it is an option to not write anything to San Bruno.
Thank you, Member O'Connell. Anyone else would like to chime in on that?
Member Schneider has her hand raised.
I'm sorry, Member Schneider.
Thank you, Chair. The city of Millbrae recently went through the airport land use issue with our biotech industry, our biotech project, which just started smashing down the old concrete tilt-up buildings. I guess in this new process of having a quorum, I'm not necessarily voting, but I don't think it's the roundtable's business to tell a city what they can do, especially when they've got pressures of housing and the fact that at that Tanforan location is their BART and just down the ways from their train station. So everything we've been told to do in terms of housing, that's why that becomes a choice for them. What we might look at as a roundtable is look at the materials that can be utilized in new construction that can help mitigate the noise. I was not able to do that during our Gateway project, the one right at our BART station, which of course is right at the end of the runways. But thankfully, the developer for the Veterans Preferred Housing, the affordable housing, they were able to put in new windows and additional insulation to make it more acceptable for living there. And I think that's probably where that's more in our ballywick is let's add to our work plan of going back and looking at new materials to help insulate.
Thank you, Member Schneider. And yes, although you're not a voting member on the technical working group, I definitely welcome yours and other members' comments on this item, on any other item we are discussing. So thank you for participating. Member Widmer.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. I don't think it's our purview to respond to this, so to speak, and tell another jurisdiction what they shouldn't do. However, it would be actually appropriate if we would give them specifics on noise contours and make them aware of what they're doing before they do it. So they probably already are, but I think it would be worthwhile for us to do that and let the airport handle the rest.
Okay, thank you, Member Widmer. I don't see any other raised hands. Anybody else has any raised hand would like to speak on this item? Okay, seeing none, then we will go to public on item number 3.
Thank you, Chairman Hindi. As a reminder, if you're calling by phone, you may press *9 to indicate your desire to speak. But giving it a couple seconds, I do not see any virtual hands raised for this item.
Oh, okay, thank you, Ms. Montes. So I'm of the opinion, again, that this is not of our purview, but I think there would be no harm done if we do send a letter, not that they don't know, not that the city of San Bruno does not know, just making a point that this project, if there's housing on it, it will be inside the 70 decibel contour. No more, no less. Just so we are, if you will, as a roundtable, we did provide that information. Not that that information is not available. For the record as well, I also spoke to the mayor of San Bruno and member Hamilton, and to member Schneider's comment, this is one thing, if they will have any housing on that property, they definitely are going to be looking for all requests from the developer to make sure insulation, noise insulation, and whatever is available technology to be put in there. So is there any objection? I heard from everyone that wanted to speak about this. Are there any objection to us sending a letter just simply noting that this project falls into the 70 decibel contour? Okay, saying none, then perhaps that's what would be my recommendation to bring to the membership, right, to opine on at the meeting. Thank you very much. Then with that, I will now move on to item number 4, the review of the noise results from test flights for the ground-based augmentation system, GBAS. We have with us technical consultant Gene Reindale from HMMH presenting. Gene?
All right, hold on just a second. I'm trying to get my video to also work.
No worry. Give me a chance to get a sip of water.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna stop share for a second, start my video, and then I'll reshare. Nope, that didn't work either. Hold on. Okay, are you seeing the presentation now?
Yes.
We are.
Okay, very good. So as you know, the Roundtable has asked for HMH to actually review the San Francisco report that they produced as a result of noise measurements they made with specific procedures following the GBAS procedures that they are attempting to implement at the airport. And so I will just second here. There we go. Did it switch slides? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So wanted to state what the purpose of the report and the measurements. The report describes the noise and flight evaluation methodology, the criteria and the results for the measurements period between December 2nd and December 16th of last year, which is when they did some flight tests of a particular GBAS procedure. And the report shows a comparison of the measured noise levels produced by non-GLS approaches to those produced by the GLS innovative approaches that they are seeking to implement at the airport. So there were 6 locations that the airport put noise monitors out. You can see them A, B, C, D, and F. They go from A being the furthest out from the airport and F being the closest into the airport. And you can see the locations there. 2 were in Los Altos, 3 in Palo Alto, and 1 in Menlo Park. And those, as you'll see later, actually are pretty much along the line of the procedure that they are looking to implement with their GBAS technology. And wanted to go over the report overview. Just real quick, this is what's in the report. There's an introduction, there's an executive summary, there's a section on noise measurements, and then measurement results, and also an altitude analysis. And then there are essentially 3 appendices. One is a glossary of terms, and then the test approach noise events to look further into the actually data and sections of the noise report. And before I go any further, I do want to make it clear that HMH had no role in the measurements or in the preparing this report. We were simply asked to review the report and provide a summary to the roundtable, which is what I'm doing here today. So just going over the noise measurement section of the report. Again, the measurements were captured by the airport between December 2nd and December 16th. The report shows aircraft CNEL and community or non-aircraft CNEL during those days of measurements. And the report shows that the aircraft CNEL range from 41 to 53 dB. And as you can imagine, the 41 dB was the furthest site from the runway. And this is an arrival procedure that they were measuring. And so the furthest from the runway had the lowest aircraft CNEL, and then the closest one, or site F, had the highest CNEL during this period of 53 decibels. And the community ranged from 39 to 65, so about the same, a little bit higher at actually the closest to the runway being Menlo Park. But CNEL is really not the important factor here, because what we're trying to understand is, I think the real purpose is to see how the proposed implementation of the GBAS procedures, or the GLS procedures using the GBAS technology, how that differs, or how are the noise levels different, higher, lower, same, that sort of thing. So they actually, San Francisco had test flights occur on December 2nd and again on December 16th. United Airlines, thanks to them, they offered a 737 MAX 8 aircraft and completed a total of 13 flights. 4 of those were the RNAV, or area navigation approaches. 4 of them were GLS approaches. 1 of them was actually unsuccessful. However, it actually didn't follow the GLS approach. And then 5 non-GLS approaches. And those approaches aren't included in the table there. And those are also the ones that are essentially the current approach, that they did not use the GBAS technology. And so looking at the flights that they conducted using the GBAS technology, 8 of them there that show, but number 8, the last one, was actually not considered a successful GLS-A approach by their standards. And so you see the other 7 there, and the actual procedure that they did, the first being the RNAV GPS runway 28 left arrival. And then it also shows in this summary of the flaps as over site E. So the first 2 were 0 flaps, and then flaps were set to 5 on the 3rd one, and so forth. And then you can see the speed brakes over site E, whether they were deployed or stowed. And you also see a couple there that were deployed to stowed. And so during around the time of site E, they actually stowed the speed brakes, meaning they were put away. And then at site, the last one that was actually stowed, but then became deployed around site E. And then the last of there was the landing gear over site E. And you see that they were up at site E for all of them except for approach number 6. And they were up, but then came down right near site E. So it's just the information that they provided as to how they flew each of the approaches. And so you have that to correlate with actually the noise measurements that happened. And so this here shows the results of the test flights, the 12 test flights that were resulting, the 5 non-GLS, the 4 RNAV, and the 3 GLS. And it also shows there what they had modeled previously and had reported out to the roundtable previously as to what the modeled noise levels were going to be using those approaches. And you can see then how it correlates to the average values that they recorded. In addition to the measurements, they also included average altitudes. And so looking at these tables here, if you look at the top from left to right, it shows the approach type and the number of each. And then the measurement sites A, B, and C at the top. And then the bottom table there shows measurement sites D, E, and F. And again, these are average Lmax values that are being shown here. And while maybe average isn't as relative as a single event, but what we want to see is on average, were they quieter, were they noisier, were they as predicted? And it looks like for the most part, the GLS measurements versus the modeled or predicted seem to be relatively right in line with what they were predicting. And I don't intend to go through these results, item by item on these, but know that, the information is here available to be reviewed and looked at.
So Gene, we'll be able to get the detailed information for all 12 flights, is that correct?
Yeah, you should have access to the full report, as did I. What I'm just trying to do is help you understand what you're seeing in that report so you can evaluate all of the data that's in there.
All right, and then the last one, you have GLS modeled. Could you refresh me as to exactly what that means?
Yeah, so the airport had their consultants run the procedures through the FAA's noise model, known as the Aviation Environmental Design Tool, or AEDT, and they predicted the levels at each of these sites, A, B, C, and D, E, and F, and so those were the levels that they were that the model said would occur from those GLS approaches.
But looking at the data, it doesn't look like that's the case.
Well, if you look at the GLS, let's look at measurement A, you can see the GLS was 54 dB on average, and the GLS model was 54 dB on average.
Yeah, I know, but
Mr. Whitmer, if I may, if we could let Gene finish his presentation, and I'm going to open it for questions and comments.
Sure, no problem.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Please proceed.
Okay. And then basically wanted to go to the conclusions of what is occurred, what is showing in the report. And again, remember, this report is not our report. It's not the data that we collected. It's data that the airport collected and is reporting. So they had United Airlines fly the approaches. They completed 12 successful approaches, 5 non-GLS approaches, 4 RNAV approaches, and 3 GLS approaches. The RNAV approaches on average were 1 to 5 dB quieter than the non-GLS approaches. And the GLS approaches were 4 to 7 dB quieter on average than the non-GLS approaches. And I think this bullet at the bottom here is important to understand, is that you're not going to get statistically valid samples from a handful of flights. It takes really hundreds of flights to really get if you will, a statistically valid sample as to whether or not the noise levels are higher or lower as compared to the non-GLS approaches. But what this does, in my opinion, provide is that it's on the order of what's occurring today, and it shows on average it's slightly quieter. And again, I think that was kind of the purpose of these measurements, is to show, was the model relatively accurate in its predictions, and also to provide more information actually to the roundtable to say whether or not it's still reasonable to go ahead and implement these procedures. Now, remember that so while not statistically valid necessarily, it does show that one, that the approaches using GBAS technologies were actually on average measured quieter. Not all of them. Some of them were louder than the other, but again, on average, they were quieter, and it's not all that much noisier or quieter necessarily. So it's really as predicted. And so we just want to provide this information to you as another data point. Remember that San Francisco has asked the Roundtable to not approve necessarily, but to say they're okay with them, going ahead forward to implement these procedures. You see no reason to not at this point. And I still say, and I've said this before, one of the differences in implementing these procedures over the procedures that the FAA implemented with the Metroplex is that you can go back. You can decide to not use the GBAS technology and take those procedures out of the mix and go back to the regular procedures. And so given the modeling review that we had done previously, showing that it seemed like the GBAS procedures were not any noisier, and some offered them to be a little bit quieter perhaps. Anyway, I think the recommendation, this hopefully helps a little bit in the Roundtable deciding whether or not to, let or decide to communicate to the airport that, yeah, let's go ahead and try these. So that's all I have for now, and I'll take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Roundell. So I'm going to go ahead and open the floor to questions from members of the Roundtable. I see Brian Perkins' hand is up. Mr. Perkins.
Thank you, Chair Hindi. I wonder from Mr. Roundell if he could answer a question that's puzzled me about GBAS, and that is whether or not the approaches are quieter. Does the precision location of the planes mean that it's also more likely that in the future the planes will vary from the established approaches? In other words, we'll get a lot more vectoring over the communities potentially than we have at the moment.
I actually don't know the answer to that question. I don't know if there's somebody at the airport that's available to answer that, or their consultant.
I mean, I think before someone answers it, I just think that someone should be looking at that, because the approach itself could be quiet, but the impact could be much different potentially if in fact greater precision led to greater variation. That's my only point.
Well, my understanding, I can at least answer my understanding of this, is that they are trying to essentially replicate what's being flown today, but using the GBAS technology. So I don't think there would be differences between using a GLS approach versus a non-GLS approach, but I'm not an expert in that at all, but that's what I remember hearing. So again, I don't know if there's anybody from the airport or their consultants that would be able to answer that.
I'm really asking about a technical probability. If the technology allows for something to be more precisely located, then potentially it will allow for vectoring on an even greater basis, just because you have a greater sense of confidence in the eventual outcome of where the plane's going. And that may or may not be something that is a concern to the Roundtable, but it's not directly implicated by this data here.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Perkins. Anyone else from the Roundtable have any questions or comments? I'm seeing none. Jean, I do have a question. Do you know if, I know those noise measuring sites were added, were the other sites also used to measure those flights, or just those temporary measurings?
I will defer to Crispin Valdez, who I think is on the call as well. I know for this test, they use these 6 specifically, but I don't know. I don't remember off the top of my head whether there was information from the other monitors. And I assume you're talking about the other fixed monitors that are part of the noise monitoring system at the airport.
Yeah, yes, I'm referring to
Right.
the other monitors if where they utilize the permanent monitors.
Right, exactly. Crispin,
Right,
do you have-
so Chairman Hindi, Christian Valdez. So the arrivals are captured in other microphones at the airport, especially those close to the water. But the events were very few, so they were not included in this area, in this report.
Okay, thank you. I see Member Whitmer's hand is up. Member Whitmer, please.
Sure, thanks. So these test flights were all on the same type of aircraft. So is there any factoring up or down that you can do for the different types of aircraft so that we'd get a better understanding of the mix and the sound associated with the mix on average, or each individual type of aircraft? Because I guess my concern is that the larger, louder aircraft that come through at certain times of the day, generally early in the morning, are the very large aircrafts coming through, not the 737s.
Yeah, so to answer that, really, for these measurements, they only used, you're right, the 737 MAX 8, but they, I think, did, and I'm trying to recall now, but there was a presentation earlier where they did the modeling of various sizes and types of aircraft, because there will be a slight difference, or there are some differences between how each of the aircraft types would fly an arrival using GBAS technology. So they did show the variation among those different aircraft types. And so you could take the measurement results that were provided here and, know that the, assume that the other aircraft types would follow suit to be in line with not these measurements, but what they said through their modeling of those other aircraft would be. So they did that through the modeling of the other aircraft, not through the measurements.
Okay, yeah, I don't recall seeing that, but if it's available, maybe perhaps, you could forward it through the.
Well, it's
through
in
the
your,
yeah.
it's probably in the previous technical working group packet, all that information that was reviewed by SFO and also HMMH.
Well, I was there, but I don't recall it, but that's okay. All right. If we could get it again, I'd appreciate it. Maybe I just had a brain lapse, but okay, fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Whitmer. And I see Mr. Paul Hanna's SFIA hand is up. Mr. Hanna?
Good, Paul, you're here. Thank
Yeah,
you.
sorry about that. I wanted to just take a quick moment to maybe respond to the previous question about the opportunity for ATC to vector aircraft onto these innovative GLS procedures that we're obviously reviewing with all of you to see what the interest levels are. Our understanding right now from the ATC representatives that are assisting us through the subcommittee process is that the innovative GLS procedures as they stand would have the same opportunity for vectoring aircraft from the arrivals that are out there today onto these innovative GLS procedures, but only in the locations that are the most common, which would be either points along the initial approach or right at the intermediate fixes itself. So, relative to the graphic that you see on the screen here, there would still be opportunities for aircraft to vector aircraft onto these innovative procedures. At locations other than Eddy, as an example, like they could be vectored all the way up to He-Man and then still take advantage of some of the remaining portions of the innovative GLS procedure that were still higher and maybe coming into the runways just a little bit more steeply. The one thing I just want to add in, though, is that there is no expectation that there's an increased opportunity for vectoring relative to these procedures being GLS. So we would expect the vectoring that the community experiences with the existing ILS procedures and the existing RNAV procedures to be identical if these innovative GLS procedures were implemented. I hope that provides some additional insight for you.
Thank you, Mr. Hanna. Mr. Perkins, does that answer your question?
I think it does, and I understand what Mr. Hanna is saying. I think it would, if it were even possible, behoove folks to give a little thought to the law of unintended consequences, because while things are intended to go this way, circumstances change over time, the airspace becomes more crowded, and technology changes. And if there isn't a baseline understanding of what the current status is for vectoring, and it's very complicated, I couldn't begin to describe it myself. So if there isn't that baseline understanding, it's going to be hard to measure a difference. I just think back to the implementation of NextGen, and I was assured that things weren't going to change radically, and I was actually involved in that for quite a bit. And of course, they did change quite a bit, and I was shocked, even though I was assured otherwise. So it's not that the assurances themselves are bad faith or ill-founded. It's just that circumstances, you're being asked as a roundtable to endorse this. You might give some thought to a conditional endorsement so that you could make sure that you have some way of understanding what it is that you're buying into. And the FAA, we have to keep in mind, has two imperatives, right? Safety, which we all agree to, and efficiency. So if greater knowledge of where these planes are in a given day leads someone to see a chance to increase efficiency, the organizational imperative is going to be to do that, I would imagine. Again, I don't take any issue with what Mr. Hanna says. He's the expert. I'm just looking a little bit forward here so that there's some historical record when the moment comes. Thank you, Thank you, Chair Andy.
No, understood. Thank you so much, Mr. Perkins. Anyone else from the roundtable has any comments before I open it to the public or questions? Okay, then we'll take it to the public and we'll bring it back for further discussion if needed.
Thank you, Chairman. We do have 4 hands raised from members of the public, and I actually do have a hand raised from Miss Kathleen Wentworth. So I will first call on Miss Wentworth.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I just had a couple of questions for Jean, or perhaps it's for Paul Hanna, I'm not sure. What were the non-GLS approaches? Were they all in ILS to 28 left or right, or something else? Anybody? Thank you, Paul.
Sorry, I didn't want to take up your time on the time.
Oh, okay, then I'll just run the questions out and then you talk.
Sure thing.
And how they are correlate with the other charts, with the RNAVs and the GLSs. And I assume that these 2 nights that the test flights were done, and they show that they're in sequence apparently time-wise. This required special handling from ATC. I mean, this was a very big deal. The ATC cleared out the way for them, made sure that they had nothing in their way, and they hit the right fix at the right altitude, and were able to do what was required. And I assume that same procedure was done, I would hope, for the non-GLS approaches, so that they also were given that same kind of special handling by ATC. And let's see, what else was it? I guess that probably are my first two questions right now. Thanks.
Okay, if anyone would like, whether Jean or Paul would like to answer those questions for Ms. Wentworth, that would be wonderful.
I was actually going to offer to maybe pass the first opportunity to Christian Valdez about the non-GLS approaches, and then I'll pick up from there. Christian, did you want to jump in on that one?
I do. I have a question first. Are you referring, Ms. Wentworth, to the 5 non-GLS approaches that are on table J?
Yes.
Yes. So those 5 approaches were filtered out or selected out of the total of 9 that took that similar approach from the Surfer. Those were done by different airlines, if I recall correctly, American, Southwest, and also United Airlines.
So perhaps if I could follow on from Christian's explanation, there was no special coordination for those 5 non-GLS procedures. Those were just aircraft flying existing approaches into either runway 28 left or 28 right. that were detected over the period when United was also potentially doing its evaluation flights. Actually, it was during the time periods that are listed in the portable noise measurement report. That might also answer your second question about what kind of ATC coordination was there for those non-GLS approaches. There was no special coordination for those. Those were just normal aircraft that were picked up over the same portable noise measurements. The only kind of special ATC coordination that was enacted was when the United Airlines aircraft was flying either, the existing RNAV approach that we have identified in the report or the GLS equivalent of it. So those 7 procedures in particular.
Okay, thank you. So moving on with public comment, I will then call on Mr. Mark Scholl, followed by Darlene Yapley. So Mr. Scholl, please accept this request to unmute your microphone and begin speaking.
Mark Scholl, Palo Alto. I'm surprised that HMMH reached any conclusions, given that the United flight test data was extremely limited and completely non-normalized. Moreover, the report averaged different paths and locations together as if they were fungible. They're not equivalents. It ignored the well-used and quieter tiptoe and only included the noisier RNAV in its assertion that GBAS is no worse. It used 5 mystery flights and then didn't provide detail about them. We know nothing about the test times and conditions. Were they during rush hour or during quiet periods? Finally, it is misleading to end with the page that positively asserts that GLS is quieter, then tack on, quote, something like, but we really don't have the data to say this. On the other hand, what we do know with high confidence is that flights coming off the surface structure at Eddy are significantly over energy. We've reported this for 4 years. It showed up in the BATA 4 models and dramatically in the United flight test. What this says is that a massive amount of unnecessary noise is being created regardless of procedure type because the FAA has refused to fix SURFR, even while spending 4 years on the technically impossible BSR. To be clear, over energy does not just create excess noise, it increases fuel consumption, it increases pilot and controller workload, and if persistent on a heavily used procedure, that then interacts with adjacent procedures, as the case with SURFR, it is likely unsafe. To me, the bottom line is GLS cannot band-aid SURFR's over energy problem. It is foundational and needs fixed. Second, the monitors in Palo Alto show significant problems, including regular Class B excursions and the second highest level of noise exceedances. They need to be permanent for safety, if not noise reasons. And third, approval of GLS segments outside the roundtable boundary should be from those outside the roundtable boundary who are directly under them, not from the roundtable. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Scholl. I will now call on Ms. Darlene Yapley, followed by Ms. Rebecca Ward. And I'm sorry, Chair, I did forget to mention that we did get a written public comment for this item, and it has been circulated and posted to the website. So Ms. Yapley, please accept this request.
Palo Alto hired consultant ABCX2 to analyze GBAS. The ABC2 and the HMMH findings are different. ABC2 did not use averages. HMMH comparisons were only based on averages. ABC2 used only the test flights, and HMMH used the test flights and these non-GLS approaches that were not test flights. Comparing 7 test flights to non-GLS approaches is inconsequential. Details on these non-GLS approaches were not provided, and it was just mentioned they were different airlines. So how can that be apples to apples? What GBAS comparisons really matter? 1, actual RNAV to actual GLS. This tells you if the GBAS approaches are quieter or louder than the RNAVs. What matters? Number 2, actual versus modeled. This tells you if the model is a reliable indicator of noise. ABC2 concluded 4 points. Using Site E at side-by, the actual RNAV to actual GLS range between negative 6.2 dB to positive 8.3 dB louder. 2 out of the 3 are quieter, but 1 was louder. The SEL differences for the actual GLS to modeled shows a difference of negative 0.45 to 7.7. Again, the model is not reliable. Group 1 EDI IA's noise benefit cannot be determined. The data was insufficient. D-Bay is expected to reduce noise because it goes over the bay. In conclusion, the tests were inconclusive. One cannot say GLS was quieter than RNAV and that the model was reliable. Please do not approve Group 1 EDI IAs. They could negatively impact cities that are not members of this roundtable. Yes for D-Bay because it goes over the bay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Yapley. I will lastly call on Ms. Rebecca Ward.
Hi, I'd just like to make a couple quick comments. One, Gene said in his presentation that, quote, on the order of what's occurring today. And I just do want to remind people back at the 1/19/2022 technical working group meeting, what that really meant, which is the existing RNAV approaches required significant energy reduction techniques, as mentioned, speed brake, higher flap settings earlier in the approach, and early gear deployment. In addition, these flights are also often going below SFO's Class B airspace. So there's both a noise issue and a safety issue with Surfer. That needs to be fixed before you start overlaying or adding quote unquote innovative approaches. Secondly, you really can't be approving procedures that are outside your jurisdiction. You guys have made it very clear, most of you on this technical working group, or I think all of you who are permanent members, voted against Palo Alto or any community outside San Mateo in San Francisco County being a member. So please do not make decisions for communities that are severely impacted by SFO noise. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Chairman, we have no more hands raised for this item.
Thank you, Ms. Montes. Let me bring it back to the members and see if any further questions or discussions.
Through the chair.
Yes, Member O'Connell.
Does HMMH have any comment on the secondary consultant that has issued a report and was provided to us by the public about including the non-GLS flights that were they all the same aircraft? Were they all the same 737 MAX? The ones that are listed as the non-GLS that were random flights. Is that make the data less confident? Does HMMH feel that way, Gene?
Like I said in the conclusion slide, it is we don't have a statistically valid sample of data at this point, and you wouldn't without having hundreds, if not thousands, of flights occurring. And I do believe, and Christian, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I do believe that the non-GLS flights were from the same aircraft type, just different operators and in their normal flight, rather than, you know, than the United flights also flying the non-GLS. And I think the reason that they did that was so that it was exactly what's being flown today over that time period that they were out doing the measurements, and then trying to compare that to what United flew for their GVAS technology flights.
Well,
if I could add, yes, those 5 non-GLS approaches were done by the Boeing 737 MAX 8.
Okay, and wouldn't it be that the non-GLS flights, because they were, you know, public flights basically, or regular scheduled flights, were loaded differently than what the flight was, the test flights done? So would the weight of the aircraft and the load make a difference on what kind of noise level it produces?
I can start with that if others want to add in, but on arrival, it's less of an issue than on departure. Departure is very much dependent on what the aircraft weighs on departure. That's why you take into account how much fuel they have on board, how much passengers, and those sorts of things. But on arrival, It's less of an issue as to how much weight they have in it. It's all about power management and getting the aircraft down onto the ground. Yes, those are, revenue flights where they are fully loaded, whereas a 737 that the United flew for this, there were no passengers, and I wanted to make that clear that people understood that this was not a revenue flight.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Member O'Connor. Anyone else?
Member Whitmer has his hand raised.
Okay, Member Wedmer, apologize, did not see your hand.
That's all right, no problem. First off, I'd like to thank the members from Palo Alto for bringing up some very salient points. I know that they've brought up several times at the regular meetings the issue about the speed, and so I would like to echo that, because that is something I think that we need to get a little bit more data on, and we have brought that up, that the speed in which the aircraft need to be slowed down is going to become an issue. And then secondly, I guess I would like that the airport or HMMH actually look at the data that their consultants compiled and see what sort of correlation they can get from that. Perhaps we might want to modify the final report before it goes into the final membership for vote. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay, thank you. Jean, I do have one question before we move on. Do you agree with the approach that for better metrics, by comparing the actual RNAV to the actual GLS rather than averages, would that get you a more reliable, accurate data?
There's a couple of comments for that. First, the model is all about averages, right? It's not taking into account things that happen, during a flight that are anomalies, and so which is another reason why you need hundreds, if not thousands, of test flights to really understand this. And so while I agree that you saw negative, you also saw positive, which means you have a reduction. You also have more noise than the average. But again, it's more than the average or less than the average. But on average, these basically what I would summarize is that there's nothing indicating in the data that is different than what you would think from the model that they did. So, it seems that the test flights validated to some extent the model, but again, it's not statistically valid sample. It just shows that if they're in the ballpark, it's not like they're way off. It wasn't 20 dB different or something like that. It was we're talking 5 to 10 dB on either side of the average. So we just don't have enough data, and it's very expensive to do these test flights. And the fact that United was willing to do this on their dime, hopefully they got some credit for that. But these flights are very, very expensive to do, and it's the fact that you were able to get 12 or 13 of these flights and be able to compare it just to show it's in the ballpark. It's not saying that it's quieter necessarily, but it's also not saying it's way different than what San Francisco was expecting based on the modeled results. Yeah. I don't know if that completely answers your question, but I did also want to make those points.
No, it does. It does. Thank you. And I think the biggest challenge for me, and it's just not enough data, right? It's not statistically valid to come to a conclusion, but understand the restrictions, understand the cost, that to really get a proper data set, you would really have to fly, as you had just mentioned, hundreds, if not more, of flights to be able to get reliable data. But we also understand the challenges. That's probably not feasible to do. But, I see Member Ortiz's hand is up. I'll go to him and then I'll come back to myself if no one else.
Great, thank
Member
you,
Ortiz.
Mr. Chair. Thank you very much. I just want to make a quick comment. We are trying to work with the airport to get these procedures put in place. We don't have sufficient data because we don't have flights that are going there but I think Mr. Randall said it well, that this is reversible. If the the GBAS procedures don't work well, they can be returned to or amended to work a little better. But at the end of the day, we have modeling that says they're going to be quieter, or not quieter, but about the same. We have a very limited amount of test flights that say that it will be about the same. So the only way to get the large number of data points to be able to do a statistically significant comparison is to put these procedures in place. So with that, I mean, I don't think there's any other way. And so our option is either we completely shut it down because we still see that there's, a possibility that it could get louder, or we say based on the modeling and based on the test flights, we're going to move forward, and then we'll start collecting the data to compare it and be able to do something about it. So it's going to be up to us whether we say, no, we're not going to move forward because we have some indications that there might not be similar or a reduction in noise, or we move forward and then we can start collecting the data to compare it. So for me, Mr. Chair, I would say we need to just approve these procedures, bring them to the full roundtable for approval, and move on, and then start collecting the data to compare it. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate your comment. I agree with the first part of it, not necessarily the second part, but I'll tell you, I totally agree with you that, and this is where I was going, that we need to proceed or tell the SFO to proceed if they wish to proceed, if you will. That's the only way that you really could collect the data. And I take solace, and we heard Director Sotero several times had mentioned that his commitment to the community, that if any procedure, GLS procedure, will have more noise than what it is today, it will not continue. It will be reversed. So I take that to heart, and I respect that, and that would be my position on this. With regards to the roundtable approving or not approving, I don't think it is the job of the roundtable to approve a procedure or not. It is not in our purview again, and we are not the one who approve procedures. These are procedures that are gonna be presented and being under development by SFO, and eventually the entity that will approve them would be the FAA, not the roundtable. So I think the position for us would be whether to tell SFO to proceed if they wish to proceed, or we would say, no, this is something that we think is not good for our community. And I think at this point, since we do not have the data set, I cannot come to the conclusion that this is bad for our community and this will create more noise. So those are my comments, and this is where I feel that I would like us to deliberate on and hear from the rest of you on what I just said.
Member Schneider has her hand raised, Chair.
Member Schneider.
Thank you. A few years ago, I would have been in the camp of let's go forward, let's collect more data. But I want to go backwards to what District Director Perkins said, that there can be unintended consequences. And on one side, when I look at GBAS, and I'm looking very parochially of what it might mean to my residents, it means that airplanes might come in sooner, especially in bad weather, and turn around and leave before they hit the night frame. And in that case, that's how I've supported this over the years that this has been coming to the roundtable. However, I also can see that this will allow SFO to land more flights, expand operations, which, given that all departures from 1 and most of the departures from 28 impact the close-in cities, we are going to have an unintended consequence from this. That is what my gut is telling me. And here, I know San Mateo County likes us all to be goodness and happiness and work along, but I will tell you right now that the city of Millbrae has an agreement with SFO. It has to do with a separate issue, but SFO has not held up their commitment. So I would not support hearing SFO says, oh, well, if it doesn't really turn out to be really good, we'll stop doing it. I simply do not believe it based on what has happened the last couple of years with Lomita Canal. And I would caution all of you to learn from Millbrae's experience. Sorry, I don't support this.
Thank you, Member Schneider. Member Woodmer.
Sure. Thank you very much. Let me make sure. Yeah, okay. Yeah, if we were to move forward on something, then there needs to be criteria of what it would take to stop it. And I think it's got to be, considered the whole region, not necessarily just the people on this roundtable, and not the majority of the people on the roundtable, because this noise will be potentially felt by others more so than others. I'm more or less in the camp of Councilmember Schneider, because we really haven't done enough testing. And I realize what you're saying, and I agree with you, Sam, that until we have more data, until we try to do something, we won't really know what the full consequences are, or what the real numbers are. So, it might be prudent to say, let's try it out for a larger sample size. But then before we do that, I would want to know what the criteria is for shutting it down or asking the airport to reconsider certain things, because obviously, the people from Palo Alto, have their concerns. And there's not somebody at this meeting right now from Menlo Park. And so, they're going to be impacted the same as we are here in the east end of Atherton. So I would want to know how we would stop it if we had to, but I would like to see a greater sample size. So,
thank you, Member Woodmer. That's a very valid point. Understanding the criteria for reversing it or stopping it or shutting it down, whichever term you would like to use. I think that's a valid point, and we need to get a better understanding from SFO what would be the process, what would be the timeline if a procedure became more noise producing rather than the current procedures. With regards to communities outside or who are not members of the roundtable, again, we are not going to be approving anything. We are simply whether we want to say go ahead, no objection, or just go ahead, proceed, and then we evaluate. It is not, again, I just want to emphasize, it's not our job to approve the procedures. With regards to Member Schneider's comment about more traffic or more flights coming in, I think I'm going to defer to Jean, and I read the report, and my understanding that implementing GLS procedure will neither decrease nor increase whatever the traffic might be on RNAV or ILS or whatever technology is available. Is that accurate, or am I missing something?
I'm going to defer to Paul. I think Paul is still here. He's more the expert on that than I am.
I think your understanding, Chairman, is correct, or at least it is. It matches our project team's understanding as well, that we would not expect either an increase or a decrease in approach arrival operations when the GBAS is in operation, which it is now. For those of you that actually may not have caught it, the GBAS went live on Monday for just the overlay approaches. But certainly for these innovative procedures, we're not expecting either an increase or a decrease in the number of operations coming into SFO once if or when they came online.
Okay.
I also wanted to maybe, I'm sorry, this is, if there's others that have their hands raised, I wanted to maybe offer a little bit of insight about the mechanics of how a GLS procedure could be deactivated if criteria established by this technical working group or the roundtable were identified, and that criteria was tripped and the procedure needs to get deactivated. I can provide some insight now on how that would work if everybody's interested.
Absolutely. I would love to hear that. Thank you.
So we've brought up this question because many of the members here have asked this question. So we took it back to our flight procedures subcommittee, which does have several representatives from the FAA that we were able to pose this question to say, okay, we have an airport-owned navigational aid, which means it is operated and maintained by the San Francisco International Airport. And one of the things that's unique about GLS approaches is they get loaded into that navigational aid that's owned by the airport. So what's very different from the ILS procedures, the RNAV procedures, et cetera, that are here in the Bay Area today is because those GLS procedures are in an airport-owned nav aid, the airport has the ability to deactivate an approach, basically without any other checking with, well, what's the right phrase here? The airport has the ability to unilaterally deactivate the approach. Now, deactivating an approach can't just happen with the snap of the fingers. The airport would be required to inform the FAA that that was going to happen before the approach was deactivated. That's what I want to be very clear about. So it's not like SFO can walk up to the GBAS one day and flick a switch and not tell anyone that that's what was about to happen. But we discussed that potential scenario with the Flight Procedures Subcommittee to say, what happens if we implement some or all of the innovative Group 1 procedures? The residents have, evidence or good reason to believe that some of these procedures are not achieving the noise reduction goal, and we need to turn them off. The response we got was because this is a non-federal nav aid, the airport could deactivate one or more of the innovative procedures. The necessary step would be that we have to tell the FAA that that procedure is going to be deactivated before we do it. The reason being, you don't want to deactivate an approach when an aircraft is right in the middle of using it. I understand that's like it's very technical, right? I mean, you're talking about minutes, a problem that would have been experienced potentially over days and weeks. We're talking about a coordination level of minutes, but that is what that is one of the options that the airport could pursue. There is a second avenue for GLS procedures to be deactivated, and that would be if the FAA either receives safety-related issues about the use of the procedures, or if there's this roundtable was established to also communicate directly with the FAA about potential issues with the procedures. So if the FAA was receiving overwhelming insight from the community that any of these innovative GLS procedures was not beneficial, the FAA could then work directly with the airport to ask the airport to deactivate, or the FAA could unilaterally deactivate the procedures themselves. So there's two different ways that the innovative procedures could be deactivated in the future. One is SFO goes and does it, but we have to tell the FAA we're about to do it. And the other is that the FAA has a reason for those procedures to be deactivated, and then they just go ahead and no time out the procedures, and then they could no longer be used. I hope that's insightful information for the working group here.
It is. Thank you for that. So let me just a quick follow-up. Am I understanding you correctly that it's a very short timeline? Let's say SFO decides that they want to deactivate the GLS procedure. If you could help us understand what would be the timeline. Yes, they need to notify FAA, but what are we looking at? 1 week, 2 weeks, month, 2 months?
So yeah, so from the perspective of the mechanics, just the device and the safety of air traffic, it's probably hours to minutes. The GBAS is intentionally designed that way, so that if there's a safety related issue with a flight procedure, you can deactivate it as quickly as you need be without necessarily turning off other GLS procedures that could be beneficial. So as an example, if the technical working group and the roundtable and other members of the Bay Area were very interested in the D-Bay procedure, and it was implemented along with the GLS alpha to 28 right, and let's say that residents experienced a noise increase from the GLS alpha, it would be possible to go in a matter of minutes to hours to deactivate the GLS alpha only while continuing the operation of the GLS D-Bay innovative approach. So the only timeline there is it's just, when does that notification make its way to SFO? And I think that comes back around to, what future criteria would folks like to use to figure out the point at which that request would be made.
Okay, thank you. So just to be clear, FAA simply need to be notified, not approve the deactivation.
That's our current understanding from the communications we've had via the Flight Procedures Subcommittee that's assisting the GVAS project team, is that because it's a non-federal nav aid, the GLS procedures are loaded into the non-federal nav aid. at that time, that would be the situation. Yes.
Okay, and then my last question on this item, and I appreciate all your answers. What recourse would communities who are not part of the roundtable have if a GLS procedure is producing more noise in their communities?
I may have to defer that question to either Christian or others on the GBAS project team. I can answer, or maybe either Doug or others. I know we have, I can speak to the mechanisms that we have for how we're, as a project team in an airport, doing our best to try to gather feedback from members outside the roundtable. We have the email address and the website set up, and we're doing our best to keep up with all the great questions that have come in so far at this phase. But I need to defer to others on the team to maybe give you the most accurate answer there. So I didn't know, Christian or Doug or others, if you had insights on that.
I can comment on that if you like. And I guess the way I would answer it is, we don't draw a line based on the membership of this roundtable. And I would point to what we've been working on and what cities we've been meeting with over the past years on GBAS as an indicator that we're really looking to tackle issues that come up in the roundtable, regardless of the membership composition. And I hope that answers the question, because that's certainly how we would look at it moving forward.
Okay, thank you very much. I didn't mean to put you on the spot, so perhaps at another meeting, we could also get a little bit more details what would be the process for communities that are not part of the roundtable as far as, voicing their concerns. Okay, and I see Member O'Connell's hand is up.
Thank you. Very quickly. Since GBAS is live, at least on a portion of it now, when would it be possible for the airport to provide more statistical information that might give us a better reading on what is actually going on with those flights?
I can maybe provide just one immediate answer, which is kind of exciting, because we only found out about this in the last, I'd say, kind of 2 or 3 weeks. One of the questions that we've gotten on the that we've got posted on our Q&A website on the noise.flysfo.com location there is, we're getting a lot of questions about how do we measure how many GLS approaches were achieved, and the airport already has a lot of noise tracking technology that attempts to compare aircraft and the noise that was experienced over the permanent noise monitors that are out there today, and then assign them back to the procedure that may have been flown. And of course, with the 4 GLS procedures that are out there today being identical overlays of existing approaches, it's very difficult for the airport's technology to make that separation. What we've discovered is that a new FAA technology was implemented. Basically, it went available for FAA members late last year, and it offers some new capabilities for the FAA to identify when an aircraft was explicitly cleared to a GLS approach. And so we are currently, as a project team, working with the FAA to determine how we might best be able to gain access to that information and then share that back out through future updates, in particular with the roundtable and the technical working group. So this is a very new thing that the FAA has implemented. I will just add one additional clarification. It is an internal FAA tool only. So it's not something that the airport has access to or consultants have access to. It's something that we have to work with the FAA to obtain. And it's and so there may be just a little bit of coordination and time kind of required between, let's say that we're interested in a quarter's worth of activity at San Francisco, and we'd like to know how many aircraft flew the GLS approaches at which times. It might take us a little while to work correctly with the FAA for the use of this tool to get that data, but it is out there as of last year, and we're very excited to see what we can do to gather that information with the FAA's assistance and bring that back.
That answer your question?
In a very vague way, yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, I think we gave this item its due time that it needed really to have a thorough discussion and questions and answers. It is my recommendation that to bring this item to the full membership and see what we have, hear from everybody. I think for me was the biggest sticking point really was what Mr. Whitmer had mentioned. What is a process of deactivating a procedure? Because I take the director's word at it. I believe the director when he said that he will deactivate a procedure if it's going to be proven that it will create more noise in the communities. So understanding that this is not going to be something, and Mr. Hanna, if we could verify, I know I asked you the question, you said this is your understanding, but if we could get verification that deactivating a procedure does not require approval from the FAA, because if it requires approval, that's a different timeline than notifying the FAA. If we could get verification on that point at our general meeting, that would be wonderful. So everybody really has the information needed if they want to make a decision or opine on it. Not necessarily make a decision, but opine on the item. With that, it is my recommendation really to bring it to the entire membership and have a discussion about it and see if anybody has any concerns that we were not aware of or any ideas or suggestion that we did not think about. Does that sound good? Okay, perfect. So that would be the conclusion of this item. Thank you everyone for your engagement and your participation on it. Now we will move on to item number 5, SFO Night Hush implementation update. And with us, we have from the FAA, Elena Jarrett. Ms. Jarrett, welcome.
Thank you, Chair Hindi. Hi, everyone. To those I haven't met, I'm Alana Jarrett. I'm the Community Engagement Officer with the Federal Aviation Administration. Since the San Francisco Roundtable made the request for FAA to move forward with the night hush procedure from 1 to 5, we're continuing to work on the implementation of that request. Everything's currently on schedule for the implementation of night hush to start on May 19th, 2022 during the hours of 1 to 5. I just want to note as a reminder that there may be instances where we're not able to meet the 1 to 5 timeframe, just related to issues related to weather or ground delays or other noteworthy events. Leading up to that May 19th date, we're working on briefing and training our air traffic teams, as well as updating internal processes and systems to incorporate the night hush procedure from 1 to 5. We're also collaborating with San Francisco Airport to schedule a meeting with local congressional offices to notify them of the night hush request and timelines. And last, the FAA is going to be briefing this topic at Oakland's request at the upcoming noise forum that's going to be held on April 20th. That's all I have, pending any questions.
Thank you so much, Ms. Jarrett. Any questions? Okay, saying none. Thank you for this update. I really appreciate it. Let me open it up to public comments.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm sorry, Chairman Hindi. I do not see any virtual hands raised for this item, and we did not receive any written comments either.
Okay, again, thank you for the update, Ms. Jarrett. We appreciate you being here. With that, we're gonna go ahead and move on to the next item, which is adjournment. But before we do adjourn, I just wanted to briefly discuss ideas that the subcommittee might have to agendize at a future meeting. Member Schneider reached out to me and brought to our attention HR 6270, the Advanced Aviation Infrastructure Modernization Act. The bill will direct the Secretary of Transportation to establish a pilot program to provide grants related to advanced air mobility infrastructure and for other purposes. Do any members have other topics to bring forward to the subcommittee at a future meetings? Okay, I see Member Schneider has her hand up. Member Schneider.
Thank you, Chair. I think you covered it. I think maybe it's a discussion at the roundtable level, but legislation moves sometimes quickly and sometimes slowly. And if all of the subcommittees and the roundtable had a standing agenda item, we could probably work on comments on legislation with whichever committee is having their meeting that month, given our staffing limitations on that. So that would just be the other thing I'd have us thinking about. And I don't know if I was the only one that attended the hearing, the FAA hearing yesterday, but we have until April 1st. If we as individual cities, thank you, Mayor or Member Royce, the city of Millbrae will be preparing individual comments to the FAA.
Okay, thank you very much. And again, this invitation went to all the members of this roundtable if they would like to contribute to the letter. Okay, any other comments or questions before we adjourn? All right, with that, we're perfect. We're right almost on time at 4:25. Thank you to everyone who had attended. Thank you to staff, member of the public for making this meeting happen and for your participation. With that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Have
you,
a great
Chair.
afternoon. Thank you.